The massive hegemony warship, Stellar Orthodoxy, glided through space like a silver needle, its hull gleaming with the perfection that came from 10,000 years of advanced engineering. Admiral Velthak stood on the bridge, his four arms crossed, behind his back, as he watched the primitive yellow star grow larger on the main screen. Today was supposed to be routine, another backward species joining the galactic hegemony, another ceremony where they would marvel at superior technology and gratefully accept their place in the cosmic order. "Admiral, we're detecting ships." "Ahead," reported his sensor officer, tentacles twitching nervously over the control panel. "But sir, these readings don't make sense." Velthak's primary eyes focused on the display, while his secondary eyes continued monitoring other systems. What he saw made him pause. The human vessels appeared to be constructed from crude metal plates, literally welded together like some ancient form of metalworking. The propulsion systems registered as simple combustion engines, the kind of technology his people had abandoned millions of years ago when they still lived in caves. "Run a full diagnostic on the sensor array," Velthak ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had overseen 100 integration ceremonies. "These readings are obviously corrupted." But as they drew closer, the impossible became undeniable. 3 human ships hung in space ahead of them, and through the enhanced viewers, Velthak could actually see the weld marks on their hulls, thick, crude lines where metal had been joined by hand. Some sections showed obvious patchwork, as if the humans had simply bolted on additional armor whenever they felt like it. The ships looked more like floating scrapyards than vessels capable of interstellar travel. "Sir," the sensor officer's voice cracked slightly, "I've run the diagnostics 3 times. The readings are accurate. Those ships are held together with what appears to be basic metallic bonding." Captain Kim's voice crackled over the communication system, speaking in the rough, informal manner that seemed common among humans. "Hegemony. Vessel, this is Captain Kim of the Earth defense ship Stubborn Mule. Welcome to our little corner of space. Hope you don't mind the mess. We're still figuring out this whole spaceship thing." Velthak stared at the human ship named Stubborn Mule. Even the names were primitive. The vessel looked like someone had taken a metal box, strapped engines to one end, and weapons to every other available surface. Scorch marks and dents covered its hull, suggesting it had seen considerable combat. Yet somehow, impossibly, it was here in deep space, apparently functioning perfectly well. Engineer Park's technical report came through on the secondary channel, and Velthak listened with growing disbelief. The humans were actually proud of their crude construction methods. They spoke of jury rigging and making do with what we have, as if these were virtues rather than signs of technological backwardness. What disturbed Velthak most was that his instruments showed these primitive ships producing energy signatures that rivaled his own vessel's output. According to everything the hegemony knew about physics and engineering, those human ships should have fallen apart the moment they left their planet's atmosphere. Yet here they were, not just surviving in the vacuum of space, but apparently thriving in it. Chief Engineer Mordan stepped through the airlock of the human vessel Iron Hammer with the confidence of someone who had inspected thousands of ships across the galaxy. His three-eyed gaze swept across what should have been a pristine engineering bay, but instead found something that made his breathing apparatus stutter in shock. The walls were covered in thick metal plates that had been welded together by hand. Not precision joined with molecular bonding like civilized species, but actually welded with what appeared to be primitive arc welding equipment. Mordan could see the burn marks and slag deposits where human hands had guided the welding torch. Some sections showed multiple layers of patches, as if the humans had simply added more metal whenever they thought it needed reinforcing. "Welcome aboard," Engineer Lee called out cheerfully, wiping grease from her hands with a dirty rag. She was a small human female with short black hair and coveralls that had seen better days. "Sorry about the mess. We just finished replacing the port thruster assembly after our last mission." Mordan's translator struggled with the casual tone, but what really caught his attention was the thruster assembly Lee mentioned. Through the open maintenance hatch, he could see what looked like a massive tube filled with explosive charges. His sophisticated instruments confirmed his worst fears. The humans were using controlled explosions to propel their ship through space. "This cannot be functional," Mordan muttered, his voice carrying the authority of 10,000 years of advanced engineering. "These propulsion systems violate basic safety protocols established across every civilized world." Mechanic Cho looked up from where he was literally hammering a piece of metal into place. "Oh, you mean the thrusters? Yeah, they're pretty loud, but they get the job done. We call this one Big Bertha because when she fires, you can hear her." 3 decks away, the hegemony engineer watched in horror as Cho demonstrated the thruster test sequence. The entire ship shuddered as controlled explosions fired in sequence, creating thrust through what could only be described as barely contained chaos. The vibrations were so intense that Mordan had to grab onto a support beam to keep from falling over. "How does this vessel maintain structural integrity?" Mordan demanded, his voice rising in pitch. "The stress loads from these explosions should have torn your ship apart decades ago." Lee shrugged in that casual human way that Mordan was beginning to find deeply disturbing. "We just build it stronger than it needs to be. When something breaks, we fix it. When it breaks again, we add more metal. Pretty simple, really." But Mordan's instruments were telling a different story. Despite the crude construction and primitive methods, the human ship was somehow producing energy outputs that matched his own vessel's advanced systems. The efficiency ratings were impossible. No ship built with such rough tolerances should be able to function at all, let alone compete with hegemony technology. "Your power core readings are off the charts," Mordan said, checking his scanner for the 3rd time. "How are you achieving these energy levels with such primitive technology?" Cho stopped hammering and grinned. "We just keep adding more reactors until it works. When in doubt, more power usually solves the problem." The simple logic of it made Mordan's sophisticated mind reel with confusion and growing dread. Dr. Fentar's 4 hands moved rapidly across the holographic display as he accessed the human database systems. As the hegemony's leading expert on xenotechnology, he expected to find the hidden secrets behind humanity's impossible ships. Surely there had to be advanced algorithms, quantum calculations, or at least some sophisticated mathematical models explaining how these crude vessels functioned so well. What he found instead nearly caused his 3 hearts to stop beating. The human engineering database was filled with something called rules of thumb and calculations that used phrases like "close enough" and "should be fine." Dr. Fentar stared at a design document for a military cruiser where the structural load calculations included a note that simply read, "Looks about right to me, Designer Han." "This cannot be accurate," Dr. Fentar whispered to himself, his voice trembling. No species could achieve interstellar flight using such primitive mathematical concepts. Designer Han walked into the engineering bay carrying a tablet and a cup of something steaming. She was a middle-aged human woman with practical clothes and an easy smile that suggested she wasn't bothered by the alien scientist examining her work. "Oh hey, you're looking at the Thunderbolt-class designs. Pretty solid ships, those ones. We've built about 50 of them so far." Dr. Fentar's translator struggled with the casual tone, but what really disturbed him was Han's complete lack of concern about the mathematical chaos he'd discovered. "Your calculations show tolerance variations of plus or minus 15%. In hegemony engineering, we maintain precision to within 0.0001%. Han took a sip from her cup and nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, we figured if we built everything a bit stronger than it needed to be, those little variations wouldn't matter much. Saves a lot of time on the math, too." The alien scientist's sophisticated mind reeled at the implications. "But how do you determine optimal performance parameters without precise calculations?" "So that's easy," Han replied cheerfully. "We just keep testing stuff until it works the way we want. If it doesn't work, we add more metal or bigger engines. Usually fixes the problem." Mathematician O joined the conversation, carrying a tablet, covered in what appeared to be handwritten equations. Dr. Fentar examined the calculations and felt his sanity slipping away. The humans were using approximations and estimates, where the hegemony would employ quantum computers, running for days to achieve perfect precision. This propulsion efficiency calculation, Dr. Fentar pointed at O's tablet with a shaking appendage. "You've rounded the fusion output ratio to the nearest whole number." Ho looked at the equation and shrugged. Close enough for government work. The engines either push the ship forward or they don't. We don't need to know exactly how fast down to the decimal point. But Dr. Fentar's instruments showed something. Impossible. These roughly calculated human ships were somehow exceeding theoretical maximum efficiency by significant margins. Ships that should barely function were outperforming vessels designed with mathematical perfection. Your newest destroyer class shows energy output ratings that violate fundamental physics, Dr. Fentar said, his voice barely above a whisper. Oh. Grinned and patted the alien on what might have been a shoulder. Yeah, we just kept adding more reactors until the readings looked good. Sometimes you got to break a few rules to get things done. The alarm klaxons screamed across the bridge of the stellar orthodoxy as Admiral Velthak watched the sensor display with growing concern. 6 pirate vessels had dropped out of hyperspace, surrounding the diplomatic convoy in a classic ambush formation. These weren't sophisticated raiders, just scavengers looking for easy prey among the primitive human. Ships. All vessels maintain formation and prepare for coordinated defensive action, Velthak commanded through the fleet communication system. The hegemony escort ships moved into perfect geometric patterns, their energy weapons charging with mathematical precision. Captain Yoon's voice crackled over the radio from the human destroyer, Angry Wasp, and his tone was completely different from the formal military protocols Velthak expected. Hey, Admiral, looks like we got some uninvited guests. Mind if we handle this our way? Before Velthak could respond, he watched something that defied every tactical manual ever written. Instead of taking defensive positions, the 3 human ships accelerated directly toward the pirate formation. Not in any coordinated pattern, but simply charging straight ahead like ancient cavalry soldiers. The lead pirate vessel fired its main cannon at the Angry Wasp, a blast that should have vaporized any ship of its size. Velthak expected to see the human vessel disappear in a brilliant explosion. Instead, the energy beam struck the ship's forward armor and scattered across multiple layers of welded metal plating. The Angry Wasp shuddered. Sparks flew from its hull, but it kept charging forward. Minor damage to forward armor, Gunner Kang reported over the radio, his voice almost cheerful. Captain, should I return fire? Light them up, Kang, Captain Yoon replied. All weapons, everything we've got. What happened next made Velthak question everything he knew about space combat. The human ship didn't fire in carefully calculated volleys like civilized warfare demanded. Instead, every weapon on the ship fired simultaneously. Missile launchers, railguns, laser cannons, and what appeared to be some kind of projectile weapons that shot metal slugs. The concentrated firepower tore through the pirate ship's shields like they were made of paper. But Captain Yoon wasn't finished. Instead of maintaining distance for a proper engagement, he drove his ship directly into the damaged pirate vessel. The collision should have destroyed both ships. The Angry Wasp's hull buckled and groaned. Metal plates bent and twisted, but somehow the ship held together. The pirate vessel wasn't so lucky. Its elegant curved hull crumpled against the human ship's crude but incredibly thick armor plating. Boarding action time, Captain Yoon announced, cheerfully. Kang, get the welding torches. We're going through their hull the direct way. Velthak watched in stunned silence as human crew members in basic spacesuits began cutting through the pirate ship's hull with handheld welding equipment. No airlocks, no docking procedures, just brute force entry through the enemy's armor. Within minutes, the pirate crew was surrendering to humans who had literally crashed through their walls. The other pirate ships, seeing their flagship captured by what appeared to be insane tactics, retreated into hyperspace. Mission accomplished, Captain Yoon reported, his ship trailing atmosphere and debris but still completely functional. Sorry about the mess, Admiral. These old ships get a bit rough in combat, but they hold together pretty well. Velthak stared at the Angry Wasp, which looked like it had been through a demolition derby, but was somehow still operational and victorious. The hegemony's most advanced technological analysis team stepped off their pristine shuttle onto the deck of Lunar Shipyard Station, expecting to find the hidden secrets behind humanity's impossible vessels. What they found instead was something that challenged their understanding of engineering itself. Chief Analyst Kexnal's 4 eyes swept across the massive construction bay, and what he saw made his breathing apparatus wheeze in distress. Hundreds of human workers were scattered across partially built ships, wielding handheld torches that shot brilliant arcs of electricity. The air was filled with sparks, the sound of metal being hammered, and what could only be described as controlled. "Chaos? Welcome to Lunar Yards," Shipwright Jiang called out over the noise, her welding mask pushed up to reveal a face smudged with grease and metal dust. She was a sturdy woman in coveralls that had seen years of hard work, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had built dozens of starships with her own hands. Kexnel watched in horror as a worker nearby used what appeared to be a primitive hammer to adjust a piece of hull plating. "Surely this cannot be your standard construction protocol," he said, his voice barely audible over the industrial noise. "Where are your precision assembly robots, your molecular welders?" Jiang looked confused for a moment, then laughed. "Oh, you mean those fancy machines? We tried some of that automated stuff, but it takes forever and costs too much. This way, if something doesn't fit right, we just make it fit." To demonstrate her point, she walked over to a section of hull where two metal plates weren't quite aligning properly. Instead of recalculating measurements or using precision adjustment tools, she simply grabbed a large wrench and gave the metal a few solid whacks until it bent into the right position. Then she welded it in place with quick, confident movements. Foreman. Lim approached the group, carrying a tablet that was held together with what appeared to be industrial tape. "Hey, Jiang, we're having some trouble with the engine mounting on Bay 7. The brackets don't quite line up with the hull framework." "No problem," Jiang replied without hesitation. "Just cut some new brackets and weld them where they need to. Go. Add some extra support struts while you're at it." Kexenal's sophisticated instruments were registering readings that made no sense. "Your structural tolerances are completely random," he said, his voice rising in pitch. "These ships should collapse under their own weight, let alone survive the stresses of spaceflight." Jiang shrugged in that casual human way that was becoming disturbingly familiar to the hegemony team. "We just build everything about 3 times stronger than the engineers say it needs to be. When something breaks, we fix it with more metal. When it might break, we add armor. Pretty simple, really." The alien analyst watched as workers tested the structural integrity of a support beam by hitting it with hammers and listening to the sound it made. When they didn't like what they heard, they simply welded on additional reinforcement until the tone satisfied them. "Your quality control procedures," Kexnel whispered, "they're based on auditory analysis conducted with primitive percussion. It's instruments. If it sounds solid, it probably is," Foreman Lim said with a grin. "If it doesn't, we make it more solid. Works every time." 3 members of the hegemony analysis team required immediate medical attention. Dr. Nexpol sat in his pristine laboratory aboard the hegemony research vessel, surrounded by holographic displays showing impossible data. For the past 3 days, he had been running computer simulations of human ship construction, and every single model predicted the same result: catastrophic structural failure within minutes of launch. Yet the human ships were not only flying, they were outperforming vessels designed with 10,000 years of advanced engineering knowledge. "Run the simulation again," Dr. Nexapol commanded his quantum computer, his 6 tentacles dancing across the control interface. "Increase the structural analysis precision by another factor of 10. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a detailed model of the human destroyer, Iron Fist. Within seconds, stress fractures appeared along the welded joints. The crude engine mounts began to vibrate beyond acceptable limits. The entire hull structure started to buckle under forces that any properly designed ship should handle easily. Simulation terminated. Catastrophic structural failure, the computer announced in its calm, emotionless voice. "This is the 47th. Consecutive failure prediction," Dr. Nexapol muttered to himself. "Yet these ships continue to function in direct violation of fundamental physics." Physicist Moon entered the human research facility with the enthusiasm of someone eager to share her latest discovery. She was a young woman with thick glasses and a lab coat covered in coffee stains, carrying a tablet filled with calculations that looked more like artwork than serious mathematics. "Dr. Nexpol, perfect timing," Moon said cheerfully. "I was just reviewing our latest engine test data, and I think I found something interesting about those resonance patterns you were asking about. The alien physicist's attention focused immediately. "You have observed the structural resonance phenomena in your crude construction methods?" Moon looked confused for a moment. "Crude? Oh, you mean our welding techniques? Yeah, Engineer Bayek and I were talking about how the ships seem to run smoother when we don't make everything too perfect. Turns out there's a sweet spot in the metal. Stress patterns." Engineer Beck joined them, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "The funny thing is, when we tried to build one ship using those super-precise techniques your people suggested, it ran like garbage. Vibrated so bad we thought it would shake apart. But our regular sloppy welding jobs, smooth as silk." Dr. Nexpol's sophisticated mind struggled to process what he was hearing. "You are suggesting that imprecise construction methods actually improve performance?" "Not imprecise," Moon corrected, pulling up a graph on her tablet. "Just not obsessively." "Perfect. See, when you weld metal by hand, you create these tiny variations in density and stress distribution. Turns out those variations create harmonic resonances that actually strengthen the hull under certain conditions." Beck nodded enthusiastically. "It's like the difference between a machine-made violin and one carved by hand. The machine version might be technically perfect, but the handmade one sounds better because of all the tiny imperfections." Dr. Nexpol stared at the data Moon was showing him. The crude human construction methods were accidentally creating quantum resonance patterns that enhanced structural integrity rather than weakening it. The random variations in their welding actually distributed stress loads more efficiently than perfectly uniform construction. "You have discovered a fundamental loophole in structural engineering," Dr. Nexpol whispered. "Completely by accident." Moon grinned and shrugged. "We just build stuff until it works. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones you stumble across by mistake." The emergency session of the Galactic Hegemony Council convened in the great crystal chamber of the capital world, with representatives from 1,000 species gathered to discuss what many were calling the greatest threat to galactic stability in recorded history. Not an invasion, not a plague, but something far more dangerous: humans who built better spaceships using methods that shouldn't work. High Chancellor Morthak's voice echoed through the chamber as he addressed the assembled delegates. "If word spreads that 10,000 years of advanced engineering can be surpassed by creatures wielding primitive welding torches, our entire technological hierarchy will collapse. Species across the galaxy will abandon proven methods for this human chaos." The decision was unanimous. The war fleet, infinite precision, would demonstrate the superiority of proper engineering through overwhelming force. 50 of the most advanced vessels in the hegemony arsenal, each one a masterpiece of mathematical perfection and technological achievement. Admiral Song received the news while standing in the observation deck of Earth's primary orbital defense station. She was a compact woman with short gray hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen enough combat to know that the biggest threats often came from unexpected directions. Through the viewport, she could see the human fleet gathering, a collection of ships that looked more like floating scrapyards than instruments of war. "Ma'am, we've got confirmation from Fleet Intelligence," her aide reported. "The Hegemony is sending their best ships, 50 vessels, each one capable of sterilizing an entire planet." Admiral Song nodded thoughtfully. "And how many ships do we have ready for deployment?" 12, ma'am. But the engineering teams are asking if you want to wait for the new experimental vessels to be completed. They're still running field tests." "What kind of field tests?" Song asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Fleet Commander." Nam's voice crackled over the communication system from the testing facility. "Admiral, we just finished the stress tests on the new heavy cruiser, Determined Fool. Good news, the hull held together during the weapons trials. Bad news, we accidentally melted part of the test asteroid." Song smiled slightly. Nam was one of the few commanders who understood that sometimes the best military strategy involved doing things that made no sense to anyone else. "Define accidentally melted, Commander." "Well, the new fusion cannon array we cobbled together from spare reactor parts put out about 3 times more energy than we calculated. The targeting computer gave up trying to track the beam strength and just started displaying error messages. Through her binoculars, Song could see the Determined Fool in the distance. It looked like someone had taken a standard cruiser design and then added everything they could think of to it. Extra armor plating, additional weapons mounts, and what appeared to be entire sections of other ships welded onto the hull wherever they fit. "How many of these experimental vessels are ready for combat?" Song asked. "All 6 of them, Admiral. They're ugly as sin, and half the systems are held together with hope and determination, but the weapons testing exceeded all expectations. The engineers are calling them impossible, but they can't argue with the results." Song looked out at the approaching hegemony fleet, their ships gleaming with the perfection of advanced technology. Then she looked at her own fleet, patched, welded and built by people who treated starship construction like an art form rather than a science. "Launch all vessels," she commanded. "Time to show them what impossible looks like." The space between Earth and Mars became a theater of impossible warfare as the hegemony war fleet, infinite precision, faced off against the human defense flotilla. Admiral Velthak watched from his command deck as his 50 pristine vessels moved into perfect formation, their movements synchronized with mathematical precision that had taken millennia to achieve. "All ships initiate Protocol 7 engagement pattern," Velthak commanded. "Demonstrate the superiority of proper military engineering." The hegemony fleet moved like a single organism, each ship taking its designated position in a formation that maximized firepower while minimizing vulnerability. Their weapons charged in perfect sequence, targeting computers calculating optimal firing solutions with quantum precision. On the other side of the battlefield, Captain Ryu stood on the bridge of his heavy cruiser, Stubborn Bull, watching sparks shower from an overloaded control panel while his crew worked frantically to keep the ship operational. "Damage Control Chief CO, how are we looking down there?" Chief CO's voice crackled over the intercom from somewhere deep in the ship's belly. "Captain, the good news is most of our systems are working. The bad news is I'm not entirely sure why. The port fusion reactor is making sounds it's never made before, and I think one of the engine mounts is held on with emergency welding. Will it hold together long enough to fight?" Ryu asked, gripping his command chair as the ship shuddered through what felt like a controlled explosion. "Only one way to find out," CO replied cheerfully. "But I'd recommend not making any sudden maneuvers or slow maneuvers. Actually, just try not to move too much." The battle began with the hegemony fleet firing in perfect volleys, their energy beams creating a deadly light show across space. The human ships responded in a way that defied every tactical manual ever written. They scattered in completely random directions, engines firing at what appeared to be arbitrary intervals. Captain Ryu's ship suddenly accelerated straight toward the enemy formation, its hull groaning under stresses that should have torn it apart. "All weapons fire everything we've got," he shouted over the noise of protesting metal. What happened next made the hegemony officers question reality itself. The Stubborn Bull unleashed a barrage of weaponry that shouldn't have been possible to mount on a ship of its size. Missile launchers, railguns, energy cannons, and what appeared to be modified mining equipment all fired simultaneously. The concentrated firepower punched through the shields of 3 hegemony vessels before they could react. But the human ship paid a price. Entire sections of its hull were glowing red-hot. Atmosphere was venting from multiple breaches, and what looked like actual fire was visible through the observation windows. "Captain," Chief Seo's voice came through the static-filled intercom. "We've got problems. The forward armor is compromised. 2 fusion reactors are running in the red zone, and I think something important just fell off the ship." "Can you fix it?" Ryu asked, watching his tactical display show enemy vessels moving to surround his position. "Already on it," Seo replied. "I've got teams with welding torches sealing the hull breaches, and we're jury-rigging the power systems. Give me 5 minutes and we'll be good as new. Well, mostly functional anyway." Through the chaos, the impossible became reality. The human fleet was winning. Ships that looked like they were held together with determination and spare parts were defeating vessels representing the pinnacle of galactic engineering. The silence in the hegemony high command chamber was deafening as the final battle reports streamed across the holographic displays. 50 of their most advanced warships, representing the pinnacle of 10,000 years of technological evolution, had been defeated by 18 human vessels that looked like they had been assembled in someone's backyard garage. Admiral Velthak, stared at the tactical readout showing his flagship Infinite Precision, limping back to base with hull breaches sealed by emergency patches, while the human ship that had defeated it was somehow still operational despite being literally on fire. For most of the engagement. How is this possible? Chancellor Morthak whispered, his voice carrying the weight of an entire civilization's shattered confidence. Our ships were perfect. Every calculation verified, every system optimized, every component manufactured to precise specifications. The answer came from an unexpected source. Admiral Koh's weathered face appeared on the communication screen, her expression showing the patient understanding of someone explaining something obvious to a confused child. She was an older human woman with grey hair and laugh lines around her eyes, wearing a simple naval uniform that had clearly seen years of active service. "Honored Chancellor," Admiral Koh said respectfully, "I think there might be some confusion about our methods. We'd be happy to share our techniques with your people. We've always assumed we were doing everything wrong compared to advanced civilizations like yourselves." The irony was devastating. The humans genuinely believed their methods were primitive and inferior, never realizing they had accidentally stumbled upon engineering principles that surpassed millennia of advanced development. Chief Engineer Wu joined the video conference from what appeared to be a busy shipyard, his coverall stained with grease and his hard hat slightly askew. "The thing is, we never had fancy equipment or perfect materials, so we just learned to make do with what we had. When something breaks, you fix it. When it might break, you make it stronger. Pretty basic stuff, really." Dr. Nexpol, still recovering from his earlier psychological breakdown, managed to speak through his translator. "Your basic stuff has revolutionized our understanding of structural engineering. The resonance patterns created by your imprecise welding techniques actually enhance performance beyond our theoretical maximums." Wu looked genuinely surprised. "Really? We just figured if it held together and did the job, it was good enough. Never thought there was any science to it." Within weeks, the transformation of hegemony society began in earnest. Advanced species across the galaxy quietly began dismantling their precision manufacturing equipment and ordering primitive welding torches. Engineering schools started teaching courses with names like Constructive Imprecision and The Art of Making Do. The most humbling moment came when hegemony engineers arrived at human shipyards, not as inspectors or conquerors, but as students. They watched in fascination as human workers demonstrated techniques that had been dismissed as barbaric just months earlier. "The key," Admiral Koh explained to a group of alien engineering students, "is not to overthink it. Sometimes the best solution is the simplest one, even if it doesn't look pretty." Chief Engineer Wu led a practical demonstration, showing how to test structural integrity by listening to the sound metal made when struck with a hammer. If it sounds solid, it probably is. If it doesn't, add more metal until it does. The galaxy's most sophisticated civilizations found themselves learning the ancient human art of eyeballing it, and discovering that sometimes intuition and experience trumped mathematical perfection. Human shipyards became the most sought-after construction. Facilities in known space and built like a human ship became the highest compliment an engineer could receive.